Hi, Bonnie. It's a real pleasure to meet you. And could you tell me a little bit about how you first got involved with the iNaturalist project and about yourself?
Okay. Well, it was sort of a confluence of factors to get me involved with iNaturalist. I had planted a native garden back about 9 years ago. It was a pollinator garden, but I wasn't really thinking about bees particularly. I didn't really know that there were native bees, like most people. I was expecting butterflies, and once my garden matured, I started getting all kinds of pollinators, native bees and butterflies and wasps and all that sort of thing. And then subsequent to that, I purchased an iPhone. And then somebody told me about iNaturalist. I hadn't heard of it. So I uploaded that and just it took off. I became obsessed with photographing whatever visited my garden. And then I ended up hiking around all the native or natural areas in San Diego County. Um, First, really documenting plants, but then really got into the insects more than the plants, and then focused more on bees. I got involved with a bee survey project at Cabrillo National Monument, and there's a team of us, about 6 people, that go out to different transects assigned to us each month, and we just document whatever native bees happen to be visiting that month on those plants. And yeah, as far as the ground nesting bees part of it, when my garden matured, I started getting the Texas striped sweat bees, the little Agapostemon texanus. And one time I noticed what I thought was a bee nest. It didn't look like it. It was a little pyramid of soil with a round hole in the middle, not like an ant hole, because the hole was much bigger and much more round. And so I started monitoring it over the months. And after about 3 months, I happened to be watching when the bees started hatching out and emerging. Really exciting. Beautiful, iridescent green bees. I think they were all females, the ones that came out. So then I was kind of hooked on trying to find other ground nesting bees. I've had the tripartite sweat bees, the Halictus tripartitus, nesting in my yard, and I think I even had a chimney bee. I found the nest, but I never did see the bee. And yeah, now I just go around staring at holes in the ground, looking for bees.
How and when did you first become aware of the diversity of ground nesting bees? Was it with that pollinator garden, or did you know before?
Yeah, I had no idea, honestly, until that first nest in my garden. And then I live coastally in San Diego, and so most of my hiking around is done on the coastline. I mean, not by the beach, but just uh, within a few miles of the coastline. And it seems like a lot of ground nesting bees prefer sandy soil.
So,
Okay.
could you tell us a little bit about the bees you find on Fiesta Island and the naturalism that you do?
Yeah, the bees on Fiesta Island have been really interesting. There's a lot of invasive plants that grow there during the springtime, but once they all die off, there's a native plant called a coastal golden bush, Isocoma menzii, that attracts a lot of native bees, particularly this one that I found there called the Dionomia nevadensis angelizia. It's a nomia bee, and it likes to forage on that plant. And then there were so many of them, I thought they've got to be nesting near here somewhere. So I just kept wandering around until I found this aggregation in a salt pan, or several salt pans, on one side of the island. And then the next year I came back to look for them on the north side of the island. And again, there were so many that I knew they must have a nest, but not the original colony, because it was too far away. And so after much wandering around, I found a huge aggregation of many hundreds of these bees, and they nest in salt pans, the bare soil, kind of alkali flats. They're a very beautiful bee.
So, Bonnie, could you tell us how watching ground nesting bees has enriched your life?
Well, it definitely gets me out in nature many times per week. It's become a real obsession using iNaturalist and looking for bees, not only ground nesting bees, but any bees foraging on native plants. Um, and, I'm kind of the age now where I don't care if people think I look crazy when I'm staring at holes in the ground. So, I'll just spend a lot of time actually. If I do find what I think are potential nests, I will actually sit down on the ground and stare at this hole until a bee either returns to the nest or emerges from the nest, and focusing. And I use my iPhone to photograph, and so I'm just poised there with my phone a couple inches from the ground. And sometimes people are curious enough to ask what I'm doing, and I explain. And I definitely proselytize about the iNaturalist app, which not that many of people have heard of, but it's become such a life changer for me that I just enthusiastically recommend it to everybody I talk to.
You wouldn't be the only person that I've talked to that has mentioned not minding looking a little odd photographing holes in the ground.
Yeah.
That seems to be a common thread, even among myself and some of the other people at Ground Nesting Bee, Project Ground Nesting Bee.
Mm.
And how, so you mentioned that you do Transx. What was the name of the organization that you volunteer with?
There's a national monument here just a few miles from my home called Cabrillo National Monument at the tip of Point Loma. And a few years back, one of the women she was a volunteer there at first, and now she's an employee. She got a grant to study the native bees there because an unusual bee had shown up that normally is only found on one of our Channel Islands across the water, but it was actually on the mainland a few years back. And so she partnered with James Hung, King Lu James Hung, who's a bee um, scholar and professor now at Oklahoma, in Oklahoma. And so they recruited maybe half a dozen volunteers to hike different transects and record what's blooming and what native plants attract, or what bees are attracted to these particular plants. So we spend a couple hours every 3 weeks or so on a different trail and document what we find, and then we upload it all to iNaturalist with various tags and observation fields filled in, and then they can use the data to study the seasonality and what species show up and that sort of thing.
It must be nice kind of finding a community to, engage in the hobby with.
Oh yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, when those bees on Fiesta Island were nesting by the hundreds, if not thousands, I invited that group to come and witness it because nobody else had seen it, and so it was really fun to share that with them.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for talking with me today, Bonnie.
My pleasure.
Obviously, yeah, it's a very short little thing, but it's important that I just love getting to meet all the different people that are posting to iNaturalist. Oh, um, is there any other thing that you're like, oh, I wanna share this that maybe we didn't get to when with the questions that I asked?
Oh, I did want to mention that there's one bee that I've found along the San Diego River. The river in some places is lined with, riprap, boulders and things like that, but there's soil between them. And last year I found a bee that is considered globally imperiled. It's called Anthophora flavocincta, and it was identified by James Hung as that. And really cute, green-eyed, fuzzy little fat bees. swarming around and nesting there between the boulders. And then they forage on the alkali heath across the lagoon from there. So I crossed over and wanted to see what it was they were foraging on, and found that. So that was exciting to find a species that's considered so rare.
Yeah, that is very cool. Awesome.